Boston Police Commissioner for a day, Dennis White, is now suing the city to hold on to his job after Acting Mayor Kim Janey moved to fire him on Friday, as she released the report from an independent investigator hired by her predecessor, Marty Walsh, to look into domestic violence allegations made against White.
It is clear from the report that we have to move in a different direction. The future leadership of the Boston Police Department is an urgent matter as we move our city forward.
I know what you're thinking. I've never heard of Commissioner White, you're saying. That's because former Mayor Marty Walsh suspended White just days after he appointed him, following a Boston Globe investigation into 1999 allegations that he pushed, hit, and threatened to shoot his ex-wife, who then filed for a restraining order. But the new report goes further, with allegations of repeated violent abuse from some who say White's ex-wife told them he had, quote, burned her hair, put her face to the stove, stepped on her face, choked her, threw a TV at her, and tried to physically throw her out of the house. The independent investigator, attorney Tamsin Kaplan, also details another allegation from another woman who was just 19 years old in 1993 when she said White punched her, threw her down the stairs, pushed her out the door, and called her a whore after she rejected a sexual advance. And in response to those disturbing claims, all of which Dennis White has denied, Kaplan details a concerted effort to keep things quiet, explaining that 2/3 of the people the lead investigator pursued, most of whom were current and former officers, refused to cooperate, that the internal affairs ruling in the 1999 allegation was later downgraded after White's higher-ups intervened, and that officers in the domestic violence unit said they faced retaliation for their role in investigating White. Kaplan also described a message she got at the direction of the city's Cooperation Council under Walsh, that's Eugene O'Flaherty, telling her to shut down the investigation early, though she was asked to resume just a few days later. All of that despite what one person interviewed told the investigator, quote, "The history of Dennis is known by everyone in the department." Joining me to discuss are Boston Globe columnist Adrian Walker, Sophia Hall, as well as a supervising attorney for Lawyers for Civil Rights, a watchdog advocacy group that has sued the Boston Police Department looking for accountability. We also invited the independent investigator and Dennis White's attorney, Nicholas Carter, to join us. Carter declined, and Kaplan told us she says the report speaks for itself. Adrian, Sophia, thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Adrian, you wrote about so many things so concerning about Dennis White himself, about what the report, the investigation uncovered, and the rollout itself. Share just a couple of the most troubling issues, to you at least, that you raised.
Well, I mean, the most troubling thing are the things in the preview we just saw. The most troubling things are the allegations against White themselves. But I'm also concerned about the efforts of the Walsh administration to shut down this investigation. I'm concerned about all the current and former officers who declined to participate. And it just seems that, there was a great effort to impede getting at the truth here, which troubles me a great deal.
Sophia, how about you? What stood out when you looked at the investigator's report?
All right, so as Lawyers for Civil Rights, what we do is impact litigation. So what stands out to me are the systemic issues here. What stands out to me is that it's much rarer that we would actually see the release of a report like this, when most cases we don't. And what's here was a very candid report of not just inaction, but it does really feel like multiple barriers were thrown up to ensure that real transparency and real truth didn't come to light here.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. This blue wall of silence is some call that you both referenced. Here's Acting Mayor Janey speaking to it at Friday's release.
The investigation revealed a culture of fear and silence within the Boston Police Department. Sworn officers refused to speak to investigators, frustrating efforts to uncover the truth. What is often referred to as a blue wall of silence was confirmed by one retired officer who said he received 5 phone calls directing him not to cooperate with this investigation.
Can we talk about both these incredible things for a minute? And you both touched on them. So a retired cop says 5 different people reached out to him to say, don't talk. Who are they? Why are they allowed to do that? 14 of 21 people that the investigator pursued, Adrian, refused to cooperate. Some are cops. Who are they? Why are they allowed to? What do we do about these things going forward?
It's astonishing to me, and I say that as a person who has covered city government for years and covered issues regarding the Boston Police Department for years, that you have this investigation which exists only because he was about to be named or had been named police commissioner. There was otherwise all of this would have been swept under the rug. And then you have this, and everybody feels totally free to refuse to cooperate, including the current interim super commissioner, Greg Long, who, according to the report, declined to participate after a call from Acting Mayor Janey's chief of staff. So it's all enormously disturbing. I mean, there's just effort after effort to shut this down.
Well, you know, you just mentioned that Greg Long, who I, by the way, had an interaction with, I should say, the spirit of full disclosure, a couple of weeks ago, where he was very helpful. Is that on Long or is that on Janey for having her person call and say, don't talk?
Probably on Janey, but we don't know because there's so little that we do know about these calls and who ordered them and why. That's all part of the problem.
Sophia, you're the litigator here. I hate to sound like an 8-year-old and say, isn't there a law for this? How can cops on the payroll refuse to participate in an investigation of another cop ordered by their boss, the mayor of the city? How does that work?
Can I tell you, as a civil rights lawyer, this is disturbing, but not surprising. I think this is the norm, not the exception. More often than not, the reason that we don't see indictments, we don't actually see successful civil verdicts, is because people do band together and keep quiet. You know, I hate to say it, but it makes me think about the recent George Floyd trial and how shocked people were to see individuals from within the department stand up as witnesses and call out this misconduct for what it was, because that doesn't happen.
Well, you know, but as you know, as a result of that,
this has been
I'm sorry, Adrian, go
quiet
ahead.
for
Go ahead.
years. I said, let's be clear, too, that this has all been kept quiet for years. These allegations against White go back to 1999. There's got to be plenty of people in the department who know about this, and they've all been keeping it quiet for 20 years.
See, to me, and it's hard to rate the rage in response to this all. Well, I agree with everything you two said. The thing that I would put atop my list, number one, is the police's inability or unwillingness to police themselves. In the Dennis White case, they didn't come clean, Adrian, because they decided they had an obligation to the public. The Globe forced them to come clean. Let's not just leave Dennis White. Patrick Rose Sr., a credibly accused child molester. How did that go public? Also, thanks to the Boston Globe. So the question I'm left with all the time in these cases, Adrian, why do we not believe, why should the people of Boston not believe that Rose and White are not just two of many, and the Globe hasn't gotten to the other ones who did something that is antithetical to the interests of the people they're supposed to serve?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, we don't know what else we don't know, but we can only assume that there's plenty that we don't know.
The public should be critical. I think they have a right to. I think that's why the top questions that we're all asking right now when we think about police reform are around transparency and accountability. We don't have them. We don't have them from many of our police departments, and we should.
Well, is anything, Sophia, let's look at what the state did on the police reform, which took them forever, but they finally got to yes, at least on some things, even though not much on qualified immunity. What the city of Boston does, and is, I think Adrian points out brilliantly today, rather than appointing a new commission, maybe we should implement what the prior commission under Wayne Budd decided to do. What could people legislatively do to ensure that we're not dependent upon the media exposing inappropriate behavior, but that the police are forced themselves to expose that behavior in their own ranks? What do we do?
Well, I mean, I think
Sophia.
Many of the efforts that have come out so far have asked people to bring in third parties, have sort of looked for an opportunity to bring in an impartial voice. The creation of this new organization or this agency to overview or look over what the IAD departments are supposed to do, their internal investigations, that's critical. You know, I remember out in Springfield not so long ago, they were sued successfully about their failure to have an effective civilian complaint procedure. And honestly, they're not alone. I think Boston and many of these departments that take years to investigate and come to any decision for normal tax-paying people who have interactions with police that are wrong is a real problem.
You know, Adrian, often the police patrolmen's union is pointed to at the source of all evil in the police department. And I think I'll subscribe to the notion that they could be far more collaborative. But one thing I don't understand at all, how is it in the interest of a police union to help protect a credibly accused child molester and a credibly accused domestic abuser? I don't understand why they're not at the front of the line trying to out the worst amongst them to ensure that it doesn't trickle down onto the best amongst them.
Well, that's exactly right, and it's a great question. I mean, in the Rose case in particular, the conduct of the Boston Police Patrolmen's Association has been just appalling. They just take the position that they're supposed to defend their members no matter what. I mean, no matter what. And this is where it leads you to defending people who have been credibly accused of things that are just outright heinous. In the case of White, I suspect that a lot of his defenders are management, not union. But, you know, that's not entirely clear, but that's what I believe.
You know, we barely, Sophia just touched on Marty Walsh, but I assume you've seen a Wall Street Journal editorial quite critical of him. Adrian, a number of people were too, including some of the other candidates for mayor, even though they didn't have it in them to mention him by name. Why didn't he vet Dennis White? Why did he ask Gino Flaherty to call off the investigation, then quickly put the investigation back on? I assume you agree that Mayor Walsh has some explaining to do as well.
Oh, Mayor Walsh has a lot of
Sophia.
explaining to do. It's clear that he appointed White with no process whatsoever, which is what led to everything else in this fiasco. And trying to shut down the investigation is just appalling. And the only reason they restarted it, in my opinion, is because politically, you know, it had gone too far and it was too public to shut down.
Yeah.
Sophia, what do you think about the Walsh involvement here?
Yeah, I agree with Adrian wholeheartedly. I mean, for years, Lawyers for Civil Rights has called upon Mayor Walsh to act, and he just simply hasn't, whether it's on diversity, whether it's on police misconduct, whether it's on equity in minority contracting. There's just been a countless number of things that he's failed to do what the community expects of him. So it's not surprising to actually see the conduct in this particular instance. You know, what's exciting is to see a new day with diverse representation where we're actually seeing some different movements, some different response from the city. And what I hope is that we continue to see that.
And by the way, to add to your list, he refused to release the internal affairs documents in the Rose case, despite the fact that the state supervisor of records said he had no basis for not doing it. Speaking of Kim Janey, clearly she was far more transparent on the Rose front than was Walsh. Clearly, she released this report here, but you were pretty critical of her in your column, Adrian. Why?
Well, I think she should have released the report. I think she had almost no choice. And in terms of the Rose case, I mean, let's be blunt, the Globe was getting ready to sue her. You know, she declined before she said yes. So I think she has done the right thing, but I think she has been dragged to some extent to the right positions.
But you were critical of her in terms of the rollout of this. Not the rollout, that's not fair.
I don't think we need another commission. I think we just had a commission. I think everybody agrees on the issues that need to be addressed, like some kind of oversight of internal affairs and a meaningful community review process. And I think we know what the issues are, and we need to get to work at implementing some of those things, as opposed to appointing yet another committee to go find the same things as the last committee.
By the way, when we contacted her office today on that issue, one of her spokespeople said this is not duplicative. I'm just saying what they said, but rather it's about looking at leadership in the police department rather than revisiting the same things that the Commission Walsh appointed did. Final thing to you, Adrian. Does this piece of the police issue stay as a major issue in the mayor's race, or is it too in the weeds for the average voter?
No, I don't think it's too in the weeds at all. I think this is going to be an issue because the question of who's going to lead this department is not going to go away. Even if Dennis White magically does, there's still going to be a question of who's going to lead the department and where it's going. And I think that's very much a live issue from here to November.
Surely not a weeds issue. Adrian, Sophia, I really appreciate your thoughts and your time. Thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you, John.